It's time for CX education. Welcome to the podcast for enterprise CX professionals, the people who want to connect with customers on their own terms, before, during, and after a purchase is made. In each episode, you'll learn how to create experiences your customers love. Ready? Here we go.
So welcome to a new episode of the CX Education Podcast. My honored guest today is Eric Carrasquilla, the CX expert from CSG. You are the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Digital Engagement there. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. And as I mentioned to you before, anybody that can get my last name right and roll some R's and some L's is you get the medal for the day.
Why, thank you. Anytime I can roll those R's is a good day. Well, I just want to get started by understanding, what problem do you solve at CSG? What are you working on?
Yeah, so if you think about CSG, for those that don't have a PhD in what the company does, we provide a set of software that helps companies connect with their customers and monetize those relationships. So for my area of the business within CSG, I focus on predominantly the digital part of that equation. So if you think about people in a company that are worried about metrics like net promoter score or conversion or net dollar retention, the kind of stuff that you typically see under the heading of CX. So that's going to be a CMO, might be somebody that runs a line of business, might be somebody with CX in their title. And for those people, the challenge that they have is they're under a lot of pressure to move those metrics. And it's typically around, our customer experience sucks. We need to do something about it because it links to these metrics. And the challenge that they face is they've been down this path before. They've done some CX-y things, but it hasn't necessarily connected out to a metric. And for the things that they are doing around customer experience, it's typically in a physical channel. It doesn't exist in digital. And if it exists in digital, it doesn't scale, and it's not something that they can go across different channels. So we help them drive better conversion, better engagement, and better net dollar retention to prevent churn. So one of the stories that I would go through and tell people around this is an experience that I had with an airline that I won't mention what the airline is, but I was on an international flight connecting in New Jersey. The flight gets canceled. I'm stuck there overnight. As the flight is delayed and getting canceled, I'm getting text notifications, signage, people at the front are saying stuff. I go into the lounge. Somebody comes out, hands me a room key. I'm already pre-checked into someplace. They take me there in a car. I come back the next day. Flight attendant apologizes, pilot apologizes. I land at my destination. I get an email. They're sending me a gift and, thank you so much. So a couple years later, I met some CX executives from that particular airline. I said, you guys have this nailed. You're doing something right. And they said, let me guess, and I won't say the name of the loyalty program because then it'll give away what the airline was. And I said, yeah, how did you know? And they said, look, you are not the problem we're solving for. We can handle you doing it manual, lots of manual effort. Our problem is the other 99.5% of people that physical thing we're doing for you, we're not doing it digitally for everybody, and it's not scaling. So you can take that kind of microcosm and extrapolate that out to a number of different areas.
Yeah, and you touch on a really important thing, is that sometimes we'll walk in thinking CX is one thing, and the person we're speaking with sees it as something different, because this is such a ever-evolving space that is so important to get right. So let's go ahead and agree on terms. What is CX as we're discussing it today? And maybe even, why is it so tough to get right?
So what is customer experience? So customer experience is the totality of your interaction and experience with a brand. It's not a call center metric. It's not Amber called up and she said something on the phone. Your customer experience is, I have to return something. I want to return something so I can go hang out with my friends. And what was your experience around that? There might be a call related to that. There might be a physical store related to that. That might be something over the web. That might be something related to a bill, something related to a return. It's a super complex thing. As Amber, You don't care. You just want something returned, and that's it. That's your experience with the brand. And the reason it's so difficult to pull that off correctly is in that example that I was just giving with you. There's half a dozen systems, half a dozen departments that may or may not be aware of each other or go through and talk to each other. And they'll look at it in a very siloed way to say, this is my thing. I'm the marketing thing. If it's outside of a marketing thing, Amber, I can't help you. I'm the call center thing. If you're going into a store, Amber, that's a different thing. Here's a different number. I can't help you one way or the other. So to your question of why is it so hard, silos on a number of different things, with channels, with data, with people. Number two, we've been spoiled by some of these brands that just get it right. And you don't understand, as Amber, I don't understand, why can't I just show up and dump my stuff off at Amazon? I just throw it in Whole Foods and I'm done with it. And there's a barcode and I walk out. Why can't I do that with stuff with my telecom company? Why can't I do it with stuff related to my credit card? Like, we don't understand and we don't care. But what I'll tell you is, even for those brands that you think have that absolutely nailed down, they struggle too, because their business, the snapshot today, it's changing. They're having more channels. They're acquiring companies, putting together other lines of business. All of that stuff is morphing. So it's hard because of silos. It's hard because of their business changing. It's hard because of data. So for companies, the issue isn't, hey, there isn't enough data there for me to make sense of. The problem is there's too much of it and it's fragmented all over the place. So to be able to bring that stuff in, make sense of it, to do something in real time, that's another reason why it's tough. The fourth reason, and I'll quote one of our customers that we went through and worked with that has a sizable analytics team, is they said, because it's tough and we suck at it. This is something that we struggle, what we know is our business and the core part of our business. All of this other stuff that involves people, process, and technology, this is difficult to get through. Now, the silver lining to all of this is all the things that I went through and mentioned. They're solvable problems, but you need to be deliberate about how you go about breaking them down, framing them, and getting them over the finish line.
Great. And so let's delve into that. I'm sure that our audience would love to hear some tips and best practices around that from your experience. So let's just talk about, what have you seen work and why do you think it works?
There's a few different things that we go through and look at. And one of the things as CSG that we publish every year is the state of the customer journey report. And if you go on CSG's website, you can see a lot of the stuff that I'm going to go through and talk about. But there's no silver bullet. What we've seen is several bullets that lead to a great outcome. And the first piece is, even to start with, before I'm going to go through some best practices, be really clear on the problem that you're looking to solve. So even if it's written on a bar napkin, what is your vision of customer experience? Are you the quick and dirty but super low price and that's the experience that we're giving? Is it that you're the white glove treatment in a particular channel? Are you all things to all people? Be really clear about that. And one of the things that I absolutely love is Disney and customer experience and their concept of that. And they use this method. It's a compass that they put up, the north, south, east, west. And it's needs, stereotypes, wants, emotions, as you're going through and articulating out what that statement is. So if you look at some of the extreme examples of this, they've even gone so far as to create a villain of what they're not trying to be. So if you look at Tesla, they are not trying to be the petroleum car industry, not just in terms of how they lay things out in the experience of when you're driving a Tesla, but even how you buy a Tesla and looking at the journey of how you do that and removing all those friction points. Apple, their whole thing was, look, way back in the day, we're the un-PC company. T-Mobile is the un-carrier of what they go through and do. So that's the starting point of, hey, this is our vision. In a nutshell, here's what our customer experience problem we're trying to solve. From there, one of the biggest and most important steps is to look at the world through the lens of a journey. So I talked about this before and gave the example for you, Amber. You're not calling into the call center. You're trying to return something. Or you're sitting at a dinner with clients and your card pops hot for fraud, credit card. You're trying to get that unblocked real quick
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
embarrassing. And that's what I'm trying to do. So for companies going through and saying, look, let's break the world up into three main chunks. There's somebody is sniffing around and they're coming on and they're using the product and service. And then there's someone's using it through the life of a subscription or some sort of interaction. And then there's something at the tail end that has to do with retention. Even that simple piece, and then breaking down all of those steps and mapping out those journeys, that's really important to go through and start with, because then from there, you can start to identify those friction points and things that you're going to want to solve in order to provide a better customer experience. So that overall customer experience is made up of these journey steps along the way that are from Amber's point of view, not a company's point of view.
You mentioned something on a podcast you had done previously about getting that order correct of what the customer experience is in their journey. Because if you're calling to cancel or return, and then they try to give you your loyalty offer, it's insulting. So I think it's really interesting if you want to talk a little bit more about getting those pieces right, or, sort of what made you think about, or have you seen that works when getting those pieces correct? Is it learning from the mistakes or where there's the most quote unquote breakage in the customer journey, or something else that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so this is where tools like journey orchestration and analytics really help automate and illuminate where those friction points are. And so for Amber, if you're calling into a call center and you want to port your number over from one carrier to the other, that is way too late. That decision started 6 months earlier. You just didn't wake up on Saturday and do it immediately. There's a bunch of stuff that happened. You got dropped calls, you had issues with your bill, you're sniffing around in the web in different places. There may be some other interaction or digital breadcrumb. That's 6 months prior. So in going through and mapping those journeys out, the retention thing isn't Amber's upset on a Saturday. It's all the stuff that happens before there. So then when you go through and you're able to see those friction points, then you can say, what would it take to go through and remove that? If Amber had an issue with some sort of content download that's $3, do we even need to have her call into the call center at all? Let's just refund her right away. If she's got some sort of an issue with her bill for the first bill that she's going to get, and we know that even though someone was explaining it for 45 minutes, I know when they explain it to me, I forget that completely. And I look at the bill and I'm like, what is this? You can get ahead of those things. So mapping the journey out, seeing the friction points, using things like journey analytics to help you go through and illuminate that, especially at scale, because we're not just looking at it for Eric and Amber, we're looking at it across thousands or maybe even millions of customers, and being able to do that quick. Not just thousands or millions of customers for that retention journey. There's all the other ones that we may look at as well. So that's for companies that are able to go through and do that, and especially use those kind of tools. That's something that's really helpful in getting a better business outcome.
Which really comes back to something you had mentioned earlier, which is customer data. What do you do with it? So what successes have you seen, or what have you seen work when it comes to trying to interpret that data?
So I think in a lot of cases, I'm going to talk like I don't have my day job here. A technology vendor will come in and say, you need to do this and throw this in data warehouse. You need to do this technology thing. Yes, there's technology pieces that can help. But one of the things we found with customers that are successful is it's a process thing to start out with. So, in some of the discussions on the whole data governance piece and looking at putting together these customer profiles, what is a customer profile? Is that Amber and her address? Is that Amber and her billing history? Amber and her order history? Amber and her credit card activity, or where you go over the web, etc.? There's not a right answer, but there definitely is a wrong one, which is half a dozen people in the room who don't talk to each other, that can't agree on what does that component look like and where does it sit? Like, who's the keeper of the keys when it comes to that. So that's a big piece on the governance component. There's a second piece that relates to the infrastructure related to that. And that's where the technology piece does come in. And in a lot of cases, what we see with customers, their first reaction might be, yeah, we've got one of those. But when you start to peel the layers back, that's not correct. They don't have one of those. They have 28 of those that are fragmented out in different areas. So things like a customer data platform that can bring in all of that data from different areas, cleanse it, illuminate that profile that can then be actioned in other areas. That's one of the other pieces that helps. And then the last thing that I'd say is being able to go through and connect the dots back to those journeys. So in the retention example that I gave earlier, and there might be, 4 systems that are involved in that. Does our plumbing support data feeds real time from those different areas? You don't have to solve for every interaction that Amber would even have. But if we're going to start with retention, can we at least make sure we've got a clean definition of the customer? We have a pipeline into those 4 systems. We can ingest that stuff in real time and then do something about it. Just going through and doing that, companies that go through and do that tend to do better than others.
So having that customer profile tells the story, and then that breaks down the silos.
It does. And being able to go through and aggregate that stuff up, now you can take that profile and you can do something with it one way or the other. Is it related to that conversion piece to start with of, hey, somebody got an espresso machine and the returns are off the chart because they can't pair their phone with an espresso machine and they think it's broken, but it's really not broken. And just can we get somebody over the, I'm getting started with the machine hump? And then you have them for the rest of the description. Is it that, or is it something else? The other thing that we see, and it kind of relates to our conversation, I'd say the number one challenge that I see with companies I go through and talk to is, where do I get started? Where? Because I did this, okay, Eric, I did your first 2 things. We have this journey map. It looks like a wiring diagram all over, we've gone through, and there's all this stuff we could do. What should we do? And by the way, the not right answer is the should do is going to take 1.5 years. And it's going to be $3 zillion. Because I just, as new in the role, I don't have that time. And we've done stuff like this before. We've done CX stuff and it didn't get a return. And I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to go ask somebody for more money and then look stupid and have them look stupid. So one of the things that we've done around this, and I'll quote one of the folks that we brought in from one of the companies that we acquired, Mark Smith. He has this expression, grasp the nettle. And I was like, Mark, I don't even know what a nettle is. What are you talking about? And it's basically, look, get started somewhere. The data's never going to be 100% ready. There's always more information that you can get. There's something else. It would be great if it's in place. Pick a place and move. And so one of the things that we've ended up doing is we have this concept of journey as a service, which is these packaged journeys in a box. It's connectors into data, the customer data platform, pre-built journeys, pre-built touch points to engagement applications. So I'll give you an example of one of the customers that we were going through and talking to, looking at different conversion stuff and retention stuff. And what we came back through is like, guys, you know what? Like really low hanging fruit. You have a collections problem. And the collections problem is on 2 fronts. One, it may end up being, first of all, Eric's a deadbeat. You want to get him out of there, write that off. You're not going to get any money back from Eric. But Amanda, she's a great customer. She just might be a sloppy payer. If you can go through and send out a text a week before or get her into auto pay or do different things, first of all, you're going to get a much better recovery rate on collections because it's not going out to a third party. Because if it goes out to a third party, if you get 20 cents on the dollar, it's a miracle. But also from a net promoter score perspective, Amber is not going to feel like a deadbeat and embarrassed that these guys are hounding her and calling her up and the rest of it. And you can go through and get that handled. So go through taking this collections journey. You can double your recovery rate in half the time, and we can get you up and rolling in 90 days. And they're like, that then created some breathing room to take some of these other journeys on, like the conversion ones and the retention ones past that. So to quote Mark, the grasping the nettle, just pick a place to start. You'll know enough from those journey maps and where the friction points are and hotspots. Grab one, go iterate.
And so if we have a new CX professional starting in a new enterprise, how would you suggest that they maybe do that evaluation to figure out what the priority is and where to grasp the nettle, so to speak?
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned earlier, you can get a lot more complex than this, but I tend to think in like rule of three. If customer experience can be broken into somebody starting something, there's some sort of conversion or onboarding or somebody's using something, this is one big block. Then there's on the other end of the spectrum, the end of a contract or some sort of retention block. And then there's some stuff in the middle. And starting with those three, then break each one of those into three. And then as you go through and use tools like those journey analytics, you can start to see where those hotspots are. So for example, on the conversion side of things, I gave the Nespresso example because I just got one of those recently. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. It's broken. So on that, what's the return rate? And this is easy data for them to go through and pull. Show me the return rates 1 week after a purchase in a particular channel. Are those out of whack for a particular product or service that you're going through and doing? That might be a place to go through and check out. Shopping cart abandonment rates of something that sits in there and then people that don't go through. So there's a really simple mathematical and metric way to go through and see where those hotspots are. And this is one of the other things that we found that customers like about that journey as a service piece is they'll come to us and say, you guys do a lot of work with financial services companies, healthcare companies, telecom, retail. Tell me not giving up sensitive information, but what should a conversion rate be? Oh man, we're actually doing way better than we think in this area. Let's not worry about that. Let's do this other one. So there's a bunch of different ways to tease that out. Some of it is working with a vendor who does business in your industry. Some of it is using those tools like Journey Analytics, and it'll show you where those hotspots are.
So we got our hotspot. We've heard some silver bullets. What other best practices would you give to somebody that's working through this stuff?
Excellent question. So 2 other things that I'd go through and say. One is around metrics and one is around people. So on the metrics side of things, split could and should. There is no short of 120 metrics that you can go through and go through and measure things on. In this case, less is more. And this is where we see a lot of companies fall into the trap of vanity metrics. So let's say average handling time within a call center of, Amanda goes through and they got you in and out and really quickly. That's short-sighted because going back to this journey lens and Amber is looking to return something. If you had to call 4 more times and you showed up to the store twice and you went and did all that other stuff, we've just made it worse. So maybe it's not average handling time. Maybe it's first call resolution. And maybe it's not first call resolution. Maybe a piece of that was a return, but there's also something else that you wanted to pick up, or you had some sort of another issue that didn't relate to that narrow metric. So I'm a huge fan of North Star metrics and the concept of North Star metrics. And the idea is it's a forward-looking indicator that better represents what problem your company's trying to solve. And the example that I would give around this is what DoorDash goes through and measures. So yes, as a public company, they look at revenue and EBITDA and all those other stuff, but within customer experience, they look at happy deliveries. And you look at that and go, that sounds kind of, kumbaya sort of a thing, but really it's not. When you start to break that down and work backwards from a happy delivery versus just orders through the app or revenue or whatever else, the app has to be usable and discoverable. You have to make sure you have enough vendors on there that people are putting things through the platform. You have to make sure that somebody does not screw the order up because it's too difficult to go through. And my youngest son does not like marinara sauce on a pizza and being able to pull that out. And if they screw that up, it's a bad night for everybody involved. And then not only that, go through and deliver and it's right, but the driver is courteous, especially if there's a handoff and the rest of it. And if you have that happy delivery, which is easy enough to measure by sentiment analysis at the tail end of it, then people are going to use it more. You're going to have higher average selling price, more frequency, more open to using other applications on the platform. So my thing around the metrics is not think about what you should do versus could do. And if you're doing more than 3 metrics for part of a journey, really you need to rethink that. You're making it way more complicated than it needs to be. The last thing that I'd say about metrics is really, really important that you're able to physically connect dots between whatever metric you end up with and something related to making more money for the company or net dollar retention. Because if you can't do those 2 things, the people that write the checks will stop writing the checks. Full stop.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of companies that we've gone through and talked to, there's this fatigue about, yeah, I hear you, man, but we tried that. We tried CX stuff, and it was kind of this book report that we did, but no one was really interested. And the people with the money run lines of business or run whatever else. Some companies are very enlightened and they're forward looking and the rest of it, but so much of them, it gets back to what that business thing is. So physical connection of the dots. The last thing that I'd say related to employees is really, they are the front line. Even for us helping people in digital channels, eventually that ends up with a person. One of the things we found in the state of the customer journey report, especially through COVID, is retail traffic and visits increased tremendously. But when you start to unpack that, it's not that everybody goes into the physical store. It's that they were channel hopping, way more business being done online, but then they were going there because they didn't want to wait 2 or 3 days for something to be shipped. They wanted to pick it up immediately from wherever the store was. So the more that you can bring, whether it's a call center employee, somebody in a physical store, somebody in finance that's doing, the credit thing that I mentioned, if look, it's $3, just don't even make Amber go through the hassle. The more you can bring them in, the better experience you're going to be able to provide. One of the examples I've given previously back to Disney is something where one of the Disney employees found a doll that was lost by a guest in the park. And as they went, so then they found the doll and they were able to understand which guest it was. And they ended up calling the parents and said, hey, we have your doll for your daughter and they can come back. So this employee along the way took pictures of the doll in the gift shop with other dolls and changed the doll's clothes and did something with their hair and put a little bow on it and the rest of it. And something that went viral of like, oh, this was the best thing ever. Now, I can bet you money that guest not only spent a boatload more in the park that day, they come back, their experience went viral. There's nothing in the manual that says, hey, somebody loses a doll, take pictures on Insta with the doll. But that employee knew and understood what problem Disney is trying to solve overall, was empowered to do the right thing within the realm of the guardrails that they have on, hey, we want to deliver a phenomenal experience for our guests that hits to their needs and wants and emotions and the rest of it. So I thought that was really cool. And the other thing that I'd say related to that, so much of this now with the Great Resignation and so much of this factors into happy employees that are interested and engaged and feel in the loop and understand how you're solving the bigger problem. They're way more likely to go out of their way to help deliver awesome experiences for customers.
Absolutely. And you can't account for that human creativity. So going back to what you were saying, having that North Star and a big picture of what you're trying to accomplish, and then enabling your people, giving them permission is really important. You also mentioned that with the shift from digital to going in store to going to another channel, it has really been influenced by the pandemic and some of those buying behaviors. Where do you see, what industries have you noticed were maybe either best prepared or maybe most caught off guard, and what changes have you seen with your customers in that?
That is a really good question. I'll go to the quote of necessity being the mother of invention. So we do a lot of work with retailers, and I think seeing what happened with COVID vaccines in retailers for me was so eye-opening. Of if you remember back when the first version of the vaccine came out, if you know anything about the pharmaceutical industry, drugs do not come out in a year. They just don't. It's like 10 years to get out the door. So people going through and trying to find this vaccine and the rest of it, and it's like, well, we think we're close to something, but people in that industry, it's like, they can say whatever they want on TV. This is not happening. And then it was happening. And then it's not just about, hey, the vaccine is available, but it's a supply chain problem. You got to refrigerate this to a certain temperature. Do we have trucks that have, like, how are we going to get this? Then they got past that hump. Then there is the, how in God's name do we vaccinate hundreds of millions of people in a very short amount of time? And they're all clamoring to get in, and we don't have a website for this. We don't have ways to go through and notify people and the rest of it. So I think a lot of industries really stepped up along the way, but that's the one that I would have thought would have been the least prepared and the least effective. But it's that COVID vaccine thing. So if I look at work we do with somebody like a CVS, that journey of going through and, hey, you're going someplace to set up an appointment. You're set up, you're getting an appointment confirmation, then an appointment reminder, then coming up to your, when you have your appointment, hey, check in, scan this QR code, go through and that chain, what they were able to get up and running in a matter of like 30, 60, 90 days was insane. It was great to see. And I think based on that, and not just in retailers, I can give you a bunch of other examples from other industries. I think it ripped the lid off of, I don't want to use the word digital transformation, but I can't think of another word to go through and say. A lot of industries that said, hey, we have this infrastructure, this is just kind of the way it is. And then they went through and questioned, said, well, maybe not. Maybe we can do incredible things to grow our business and make our customers happy. And as cheesy as it sounds, make the world a better place. And, there's a better way to go through and do this. So being in technology, that's one of the things that it's really important for me to connect what I do to, hey, can I explain it to my mom or my friends? And is it something that makes the world a little bit better? That feels good.
Absolutely. I think the ability for the enterprise world to do good socially has really changed a lot over the last decade. And it's really great to see. So a CVS, to your example, stepping up and just putting, that took dollars. It took a lot of work. That intensity of volume of work to execute it, like you said, within 90 days is to be applauded, definitely. Do you see best practices? So for the example of CVS getting to be able to scale immunizations, do you see them able to take some of those best practices for the CX and apply it to other places of the business? And if so, what sort of growth are they seeing, or what impact does that have?
Yeah, so another area of the business would be, and this is just with retailers in general. I'll give you a few examples because we work with a bunch of them. So one of them is around prescription refills and being able to take those same kinds of building blocks of, we know a customer, we know, from history, they're going to need a refill on their diabetes medicine or insulin or whatever else. And those same things of, we know you as a customer, we know your behavior and your patterns. Things like notifications can really help get the right outcome in the right channel. And this is something that's not only a better experience for the customer, they can get their prescriptions accurate and more quickly, but also for the retailer, it's great because they're able to get, more money flowing through that part of the business versus somebody getting those prescriptions filled someplace else. And I think especially for retailers, and I talked earlier about some brands that just get it right and like, why can't this be like X, Y, and Z? For retailers, especially in the pharmacy area, they really need to be at the top of their game if Amazon's getting in that area. So contactless pickup, lots more digital notifications, lots more, when we get on the engagement side of things, one of the challenges that we saw within retailers is lack of air traffic control. So a company we were working for, and I won't mention the name, we signed up for a loyalty program and were a customer of this particular retailer. And within a week, went through and counted 40 emails we got from that retailer. And it's marketing for this, loyalty for that, something for something, like the sky's blue kind of a thing. And it's like, guys, you realize that from a customer perspective, that's very spammy and cringy, and that's not the experience that you want to go through and have for your customers, because they're just going to turn off. At best case, they're just going to turn off, and you're going to miss opportunities. Worst case, they're going to go someplace else that doesn't spam them. So being able to understand, hey, for the profile down to Amber, not people like Amber, for Amber, after a certain point, you can't send her anything else. And it's only going to be stuff that's going to help customer experience. And then on the retention side of things, for retailers, a lot of that gets back into the engagement piece of, look, for those journeys of either somebody's coming in and having a repeat purchase or something else, stay away from spam. Here's best practices of how to do that in particular channels to get particular outcomes.
So you're hitting on something that is probably one of the most mystical pieces of CX, which is personalized outreach. What are some silver bullets there, or what sorts of things do you see customer experience professionals stumbling over that you might have some insight into that you'd like to share?
So the first piece we talked about a little bit, that just the concept of air traffic control. And in a lot of cases within companies, and this is an organizational thing, some companies have very tight guardrails around who owns customer profile and who owns the macro customer experience. In other places, there's a marketing piece that may not be tied to a customer support piece, which may not be tied to this line of business versus that line of business. So getting that piece set and who holds the hammer on the overall customer experience from an organizational and system point of view, good thing. Second thing, and I don't want to use the word hyper-personalization because I'm not wild about the term, but maybe said a different way. As I mentioned before, not people like Amber. Amber has already got 2 emails this week. You're not sending anything else I can't, other than winning lottery ticket numbers, I can't think of anything else you would send to Amber, which is going to help her perception of the brand one way or the other. We need to kind of split this out. And also, some of the other, when it comes to retention, the retention side of things, not just people like Amber, but Amber specifically, how far over our skis are we willing to go? And that's a little bit more of a complex equation, not because she showed up in the call center and she's yelling and screaming, but we have insight into, and forget about your web history for a second, the stuff we own and the stuff we know, just your order and bill history, just from that, you know what? We need to do the right thing here. And we need to do the right thing right away and not have her sit on the phone for another 45 minutes. Be done with it and go on. Because people like Amber, when we get to a conversion journey later on for another product or service, you want a good taste in Amber's mouth, because 30 days later, there's something else that we're gonna go through and do there. So that, not saying hyper-personalization, the specificity of Amber versus people like Amber.
Well, and then you get into the value of acquisition for a new customer versus a repurchase. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, just the off-cited statistics, way more difficult, way more difficult on the acquisition side of things. And if you really measure customer acquisition costs, they're off the charts. Really, they're off the charts to get somebody in. But once you have somebody in, you have a gold mine of data. I don't want to say it's yours to lose, but it's kind of yours to lose. And that's where I talked before about being able to connect CX metrics back to a business metric. That's where it's an easy and an obvious thing. It's you're making money for the company or you're doing something related to the retention piece. So yeah, that's a lot of the work that we help folks do related to customer journeys is around stuff with existing customers. Because I think there's a piece of this which is like the traditional marketing campaign management, go go get new into top of funnel. But what a lot of people overlook is new doesn't necessarily have to be a net new customer, especially in with some of the companies that we work with. They're in saturated markets. So they're trying to get more out of their existing, somebody has a piece of something and they're trying to expand share of wallet.
And there's a statistic that shows that customers, somebody that's already a customer is 60% more likely to buy your product than somebody that is not a customer. So the take rate for brand new customers, and it depends on the industry. And, like you said, saturation is typically like maybe 10%. And that's somebody that's looking for the product. So to have that 6 to 8 times more adoption rate because they already trust your brand and have that customer experience, it means a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And the flip side on the churn side, depending on the industry, it's like up to 80% less chance of churn if they have 2 or more kind of products or services from what you have, because it's a pain in the neck to go through and move that to someplace else. So you get it on both sides.
I mean, your example at the very top of the airline, even if it would not have been that great of an experience that one particular time, you're pretty far into that relationship with somebody. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind with CX is there is some forgiveness, although those percentages are changing of how quickly somebody will leave a brand.
So there is, I think you're hitting on an important topic here, which is the emotional part of the equation. Friction isn't necessarily bad. Trust me, with that airline, there was friction. I was upset. This isn't like I live in California in San Francisco area. It's not like me missing a flight to LA. I'll get another flight in half an hour. I was stuck overnight in New Jersey. My meetings the next day I'm super upset. But from that experience, I haven't shut up about it for years. I tell everybody that story, and I've been a loyal member of that airline. But again, so it went from a bit of friction to something that turned into a very positive experience. The Disney thing, somebody lost a doll in the park. That turned into a very positive thing. So you're never going to be able to avoid the friction 100%. The key is understanding where those hotspots happen and to be able to do the right thing quickly. And also at scale. Remember what those guys said. They're like, look, you're not the problem. We were throwing the kitchen sink at you because you're in this different tier. So that's what a lot of those customers struggle with. As we get bigger, as we scale, how do we do this consistently across the board? Like one of the other things that I'd go through and mention with a company that we're doing some work with in Asia Pacific is lots of vanity metrics around call centers or stores or whatever else that are like these kind of quantitative, how long something lasted. But as we went through and talked to them about channel hopping and different pieces, what you start to see is, well, don't really measure it consistently across channels. And most of the people that are going through and dealing with this particular brand, it isn't in the call center. It's through things like WeChat and WhatsApp and whatever. So as that picture goes through and evolves, making sure that you have a good view across channels, focused on Amber as Amber, not people like Amber, and also what Amber is trying to do, the problem she's trying to solve versus as a company, what I'm trying to do. You get those 3 things right, good things happen from an experience perspective.
Yeah, there are so many pieces of gold in this conversation. I think from the customer profile, looking at the journey and the 3 pieces, and then breaking that down further, what you do with data, getting started. I mean, Eric, I think you just gave a MBA course in a course of about 30 minutes. We can delve into some, of those topics a little bit deeper, I think, but overall, really informative. And those silver bullets, as you call them, there's not one, there's several, but I think anybody listening today is going to get a really good blueprint of how to make that happen. So we've got just a few more minutes left, and I'm going to make this just open of anything else that you think a CX professional out there might want to hear or that we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, I would just say strength in numbers. There are so many other people out there in different companies that are struggling with the same thing you guys are struggling with. That pressure from digital brands, the issues related to data, the people in the process and the organizational kinds of stuff. And, that's one of the things that we like doing with, user groups that we'll have, or different things, events where we'll get these folks together. Even if it's from different industries, they're struggling with the same kinds of things. And one of the funnest thing for me around this is that book isn't written. There's a bunch of things that I really feel like, although a lot of the technology building blocks have been there, the kinds of things that you can do in these different channels and the kinds of things you can do to deliver a great customer experience, that stuff is evolving. And for me, that's the fun stuff, and where I love working with these CX professionals, because I do feel like they're trailblazers. And I think it's a really cool area of focus. And it's at a special point in time where, like we talked about earlier, the lid got ripped off the whole digitization thing and how people look at it and how much they're investing in it. I just think it's a great space to be in, and something I'm super passionate about.
Clearly. So Eric Carrasquilla, you're at CSG. How would you want people to reach out to you if they hear this and they want to get a little bit more information or pick your brain on a topic?
So I'm on LinkedIn. You can definitely hit me up directly. But in any case, what I would say is go to CSG website, check out the State of the Customer Journey report for 2022 that we just published recently. There's a lot of those nuggets in there and a lot of the stuff that I talked about today. And again, even if I think for the industry you're in, there's probably some things in there for that. But even outside of that, there's stuff that goes across. So I'd say go there or hit me up directly on LinkedIn. Would love to talk to you further about it.
All right. Thank you so much again for sharing so much wisdom today. And we look forward to connecting more on the CX Forum. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of CX Education. Thanks for joining us. This show is brought to you by Cinch, the technology company that helps you create mobile experiences your customers love. Did you enjoy the episode? Then make sure to subscribe to CX Education wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit cinch.com/podcast to get instant access to all the latest episodes.